Hey there, it's Sober Steve, the podcast guy, here with 1,224 days of sobriety. And I am so excited that after over 225 episodes, to be bringing you the first of what will at least be 2 episodes of clips from our vault. Yes, many of our listeners who have tuned in over the past few years haven't taken the initiative to go back and listen to all hundreds of hours of content that I've been generating over the past 3.5 years of doing this podcast. And so I want to take an opportunity to take some of the first handful of interviews that I had that I released, that most of these people ended up becoming members of the pod family that you've heard come back on since then over and over again. But these initial interviews where we really get to know them and hear their story and what their perspectives were like earlier in their recovery aren't heard by as many people today. And so I'm taking some of those clips and putting them out there for you all to hear today. And it might be fun just to, if you've also heard them, to revisit how they've grown and changed over the episodes that they've come back on over the years. So with that, the very first voice you ever heard on this podcast was me. In the very first episode, hi, my name is Steve. And here's a clip of me explaining what the end of my drinking career was like, as well as what inspired me to start this podcast in my sobriety.
I had all my rules about how to drink, and the rules did well for me for quite some time. The rules did me well through meeting my husband and falling in love and getting married. He always knew that when I drank, I was a different person. He always struggled to find a better way to say it than that just I wasn't myself. But I had it under control for a while until I didn't. Like I mentioned, around the time when the pandemic started and my entire world was turned upside down, all the plans that I thought I had for my future were no longer the plans that I wanted or needed or felt were right for me. And then I found this job where I was able to have a cocktail at happy hour, and everyone had cocktails at happy hour. And then if we went out for lunch, we were able to have a cocktail at lunch. Before you know it, that kind of culture had me drinking in between those lunches and those happy hours, because once I drink, I can't stop. And once I started having to have alcohol in the office for in between, it just quickly became a matter of having it even for earlier, even before those days, or even on those days where I didn't have those lunches or those happy hours. And it was on my days off was even worse. I was able to control myself during my weekends where I spent time with my husband. Although even though I'd be sober for that weekend or for most of that weekend, my mind would still be constantly thinking and looking forward to my next drink, because I knew that with my work schedule that I'd be able to have my Mondays where I was at home alone and able to drink as much as I could possibly like. But it was only once my husband came home from work one day and noticed, and I came clean about how much I had been drinking and about how bad it had gotten, that he really encouraged me to check out the AA meetings again. And this time it clicked. I lucked out. It took me a little bit of work. I managed to stumble onto a couple AA meetings in Zoom, and none really clicked until I found my first LGBT one. And that's where it changed for me. I heard enough during those first couple quote unquote straight or quote everyone meetings, enough to know that I wanted to keep on coming back. But it was only once I started hearing about the struggles of other people in my community that I really felt like I found a home, that I found these people that knew what I had been through and had been through similar things or worse things or different things. But we've all been through similar struggles, and they all revolve or are heavily involved with alcohol. And I didn't feel alone anymore. And I've since then found a sponsor, and I am working the steps. But in doing so, I'm noticing that there aren't really a lot of resources in our community and in our area. So I am trying to make this podcast as a way to help other potential or recovering alcoholics, while also helping to keep myself sober along the way. I have another podcast, A Lifetime of Happiness, which has transformed along the years into a pop culture podcast. But in the same way that helps keep me happy, the plan is for this podcast to help keep me sober.
So for you devoted fans and listeners who have been with me for longer with this journey, you'll know that this was a very broad strokes overview of what my journey was like. And I go much more in depth as I get more comfortable opening up. And it really just goes to show how much I've grown, not only in my sobriety, but also my podcasting ability. Because I remember when I first started this podcast, I was so worried about talking about my experiences and being raw and vulnerable with myself. And so I very much made it focused on the guests that I was having. And so just seeing as how even his very first episode, when I told my story, it was told very much as a narrative that I had curated and checked and made sure that it was something I felt comfortable making sure anyone who heard it would hear it, rather than talking from the heart, open and raw, like I've learned to do over all these episodes. So that's something that you all have empowered me to do. So thank you for that. One person who has been able to be raw, open, and vulnerable from the very beginning is one of the pod family members I mentioned earlier, who comes back on again and again because I just love and adore him and the work he's doing so much. And that is Joey from Rainbow Hill. He was my second guest in my first handful of episodes. So here's Joey back from his very first appearance over 3 years ago, back when he was talking about the opening of Rainbow Hill Sober Living, as well as some of his tips and tricks for staying sober.
Especially with Rainbow Hill now helping so many other people. What inspired you to start it?
So back in 2013, I was in a sober living with all straight guys and girls. It was a co-ed house, and I was the only gay guy in the entire house.
Mm-hmm.
I personally had a great time, but after talking to people in the rooms, I found that just wasn't the case for them. They'd been bullied. They were promised that it was going to be an affirming environment, which it wasn't. And gay friendly has turned into a cheap marketing tactic. And for us, we had the opportunity because my family had an extra property in Echo Park, and we presented the idea to my mother, and she thought that it would be very beneficial to our community and said, okay, propose something and let's see what we can do. But Andrew and I completely renovated the house. We painted everything by hand, built all the beds, did all the design in 6.5 weeks.
Wow.
And we took a gamble. And we are now almost completely full with only 2 spots left, which has been really insane. It's been great, though.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, I know that one of your missions is to offer structure and accountability to the people living there. Now, I'm not familiar with even the concept really of what sober living is like. So can you tell us more about what the structure and accountability look like to a resident?
Yeah, so the way that we don't like to call ourselves a sober living. Our guys have described us as a sober home. We're very family oriented, and we've created a very nice, tight-knit community and brotherhood. Everyone looks out for each other. And as far as accountability goes, we trust them, and we hope that we know that if they trust us, we'll trust them. So it goes both ways. They have to check in with us daily. We have an on-site manager who lives at the property. And then Andrew and I are both very present. We're not only owners, but we also work here. So we have our respective shifts. I actually stayed here for 3 nights the other week while our house manager was out celebrating his birthday. And it was a really nice time. We had family dinner. We watched movies, cooked, cleaned. Everyone has their chores to do on Saturday. So it's really nice. Everyone gets to get up and clean up, and I get to watch because they're learning how to get those life skills back. So as far as accountability goes, everyone checks in with each other. They look out after each other. And it's just, I don't know how else to say it other than they hold each other accountable. And at the end of the day, that's what's important here, is having that brotherhood.
What are some tips that you use to help you stay sober?
Staying humble and acceptance, and you're not responsible for other people's reactions. You're only responsible for the way that you react. And I apply that to my daily life. There are people who I don't understand. They function the way that they are, but I have no control over that. So I've just let go and just let them do them, and I will do me. I can't change other people. And my number one tip would honestly be, although it's going to be really hard for some people, I know it was for me, was to completely cut out the toxic people in your life. Mm-hmm. And everything else will fall into place. I promise.
Yeah. I can imagine. I was blessed, luckily, where I didn't have too many toxic people, but when I would drink, I would put myself into toxic situations. So staying sober did a big part of keeping me away from them. But yes, I can imagine if you have the toxicity around you, that won't help keep you sober. Now, with sobriety, I know that we really love our steps, our traditions, and our sayings. Do you have any sort of favorite saying or mantra that you love to share with newcomers?
although it's really simple, keep coming back. It works if you work it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's true. It is so true. I was very resilient. I was so resistant when I first got into the rooms. I was like, oh, this shit's never going to work. Like, they don't know me. They don't understand me. I'm unique. No. Honestly, I would just say go in there with an open heart and open mind. And what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? That it actually works?
Yeah.
That's honestly, that would be, yeah, I mean, that's my favorite mantra. Obviously, the serenity prayer, because I like saying that every single night before I go to bed. But it does work if you work it.
Yes.
So keep coming back.
And keep coming back. Joey did, not only with his recovery, but also with this podcast. He has been on multiple episodes since then, as his adventures have grown well and beyond Rainbow Hill sober living to Rainbow Hill recovery, all the amazing work he's doing, and has his own show now, Totally Sober. So I'll include all the information in the show notes for you to check him out and catch up on what he's been doing since that first episode. And another person who's been on over and over again, and one of my first guests, I started off, I didn't realize how heavily I was featuring people from the West Coast. That was my people when I got sober. And here's Gabriel sharing a little bit about how social media affected his recovery and his journey, which is very important to me because I got sober during the pandemic with the help of social media almost as much as I did on Zoom rooms and meetings and other resources like that. So here's him back again a little over 3 years ago, sharing how social media impacted his recovery.
How do you feel social media has helped you in your recovery?
Yeah, this question or this topic comes up a lot for me because, as you said, I've definitely put myself out there. And it's been a journey for me because I feel like I've had to really become very comfortable and self-assured in myself, because in the past I put myself out there and then I've been vulnerable and then I get hurt when people don't respond a certain way. So what's important for me is that I do live out loud. I'm very vocal about my sexuality and my addiction and my recovery. But I also have to be very mindful of what are my motivations? What are my intentions? Am I doing this because I want a pat on the back? Because I want the social media world to validate me? In the past, that's very much been the case. And that opens me up to be disappointed, to be judged. So now when I post, I honestly do ask myself, what are my intentions? A lot of it's today, I sometimes use social media as like an online journal that people can see. I share my journey. A lot of people don't get that, honestly. A lot of people think I'm being too much. I'm putting it out there. No one needs to know your business. And I don't know if you can relate, Steve, but I feel like for me, I've gotten so many amazing messages privately with people telling me, oh my God, thank you for sharing that because I feel that way too. Or I didn't know anyone else felt like that. Like just one person telling me that makes it worth it, because I was inspired by people who were very open and very proud of who they are and saying, if anyone needs help, I'm someone you can come to. I really try to put myself out there so that it helps me connect with people. It helps me be of service. And I don't put it out there because I think I'm here to save anybody. No, it's to share my journey, share my story, just like a meeting. People share their experience, strength, and hope, and the hope that someone will get something from it. I'm just using it on a different platform that reaches more people. And I tell you, I have friends who are like brothers to me all over the world because of social media, because of this conference that I did in New York. The other day, I had a friend do an H&I meeting for me as a speaker, and he's in Hawaii. And also say during the pandemic, social media, I'm not exaggerating, saved my life. Because when the world disconnected, I had a connection. I thank God that this happened now and not before any of this technology, because there were days where I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to make it through the day. I couldn't stay sober through the day. But I definitely, it was, whether it was a post on Facebook or private messaging a friend, or I'm a part of a lot of sober groups on Facebook, just that little communication kept me going. It was that little tether. I always felt like I was flailing. And then the people that I talked to every day, they were my anchor to the real world until I can get back to my real life. And there's people that even during all that, they still check on me every day. Like, how you doing, buddy? It was like going through it. They're like, you can do this. Without technology, social media, we wouldn't have had that. I wouldn't have had that. Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like it definitely helped save my life.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Getting sober in the time of COVID was certainly an interesting experience for me, but my home group's on Zoom in New York. It's these things that I've struggled finding a group locally to go to, but I have my home group, and that wouldn't be possible without Zoom and the internet. I completely agree. Even like working on this podcast before it came out, I had just had so many like amazing messages that there was like one time around my 60 days where I was like questioning it all. Is it even worth it? And it was like, I was like, I have to stay sober for the podcast that's going to come out, because I had already had a couple people message me being like, oh, I'm really excited for it. So I was like, I can't let them down and help me get through that hump.
Whatever works, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, what are some of the positive changes you've seen in your life now that you are sober?
I've been doing this recovery thing since 2006. And I like the way that you pose this question, because this time in my life, in this shot of recovery, I feel like I'm finally living my most authentic, true self. Because even in the past, when I've been in the rooms, I've had the crutch of a relationship. That's a big one for me, is always finding people to be in codependent relationship with, or whether it's work or whatever, finding something else to find my value and my worth. Today, the biggest change is that I'm learning to trust myself, trust in myself, know that it's okay to ask for help, and that doesn't make me weak. It actually makes me strong. Being vulnerable is beautiful. I still have my bad days. I'm still technically in outpatient where I'm living and working, but I still live a regular life. I just do groups and stuff. And some days are really hard. I just living in this world as an addict and newly sober again. It's tough. It's very tough. But the biggest change for me right now is when those days come, I stop, I take a breath, I ask for help, I reach out to my support network, and I just talk about it. I don't push it aside. I don't brush it aside. I don't diminish. That's another thing I used to do a lot. I used to minimize my struggle for the sake of other people. I cannot afford to do that anymore. So I'm definitely, today, the biggest change is putting myself first above all else. Because if I can't put myself first and be okay, I'm no good of use to anybody. And I love to be of service. I love being of service. I get so much joy out of it. But I can't do that if I'm not taking care of myself first.
And next up, we have my sober sibling, Kristen. We got sober 3 days apart from one another in the same home group and have been like siblings ever since then. And so it was amazing having someone going through the same experiences I was going on. And I had them on very early on to talk about what their experience was like navigating life, addiction, and recovery as someone identifying as non-binary in the queer community. So here is them talking about how their sexuality and gender identity played a role in their drinking and addiction, as well as some advice on how to live a happy, full, and sober life today.
Having met through our LGBT plus meetings, how would you say your sexuality played a role in your drinking and your addiction?
God, that's such a good question. And I think about it every day, and I feel like I don't quite know the answer. I think I alluded to it earlier when I was like, I didn't come out until so late. And I think that was partly it for me. And I'll think about how much I actually want to say this in a podcast or how deep I want to get into it. But drinking and sex and trauma are all really locked in for me. And I think I spent a lot of time drinking so that I would be okay in having the sex that I thought I was supposed to have in the body that I had. And when I was drunk, I could tell myself that was okay. I could tell myself that was enough. I could power through what I called anxiety, but I think was much, much deeper than that. Like ambivalence about, my gender and my sexuality was just so easy to slide over. I maybe talked about this in my share when we did in the mustard seed, but I'm queer, I'm bi, and I'm non-binary. And like, I feel like both of those categories, especially when I was growing up in the 90s, I didn't know what it meant to be non-binary. I guess I understood what it meant to be bi, but really it manifested in me as like a sense of wrongness that I had no way of putting into words. And I didn't, and this is true in so much more than just my sexuality, but it's 100% how it was. It was like, so I felt bad. And instead of thinking there's something about my circumstances I can change, I was like, I have to change that I feel bad. And the way that I can is by drinking. And I think that blinded me to so much about myself and my sexuality and then in my relationships. And it was just really the fundamental mistake at the heart of my life, I feel, was to not understand that I could feel good, that I could change my circumstances to feel good. Yeah, I think it was a big part of it. I lacked a lot of, it's funny because I think of myself, I like to think of myself as so insightful. I'm like writing my journal all the time and like thinking about myself, but I have huge blind spots and always have when it comes to the things I needed and I wanted. And I think it's because I drank for so long. So that's the main reason. But I could also say in some ways coming out, my relationship was hard. It didn't work out, but it was part, I feel like it also helped me as I started to know who I was on the path to getting sober. Do you know what I mean? And to be in the mustard seed, like the rightness of that, I feel like I could be there and know who I was. I actually started for the first time ever using, and I'm still figuring out pronouns in particular. Actually, the first time I ever experimented with using a pronoun was in the mustard seed. I had recognized that I was a non-binary. I was talking to my therapist about it. I wasn't really sure how pronouns would fit in that, but I felt so safe in that space. It was the first time that I really got a chance to just try to be who I was and not feel like I had to have everything solved and figured out before I started communicating it, which is actually, you can't do that. You have to be with people that you trust and show yourself to them, and then you can understand who you are. And I feel like that is something that's so lucky for me. And I feel like it's a kind of sunnier way that my sexuality and my sobriety are connected. It's like, yeah, in some ways, my sexuality and my drinking were connected, but I also feel like I was more able to get sober because I had this community that was there and welcoming to me. And I'm so grateful for that. So.
Oh, yeah. I can't imagine being sober and not be part of the LGBT plus sober group.
Yeah, it really is. And it's such a joy, I think, people talk about this coming in all the time. I have this one image of AA and it's white dudes. But it's like, no, yeah, it can be great and actually really healing. I feel like sometimes, because I've had so many bad experiences with old white dudes, to have them like talking about God and their feelings. I'm like, you're healing a deep wound in me. But I feel like going into queer meetings it's not just that people are queer. So they tend to be younger and they're asking the same question. We have so much in common in that space. And it is such a just like vibrant, it's a cheesy word, but such an array of like interesting humanity and people that I want to meet in any context. It's so cool. It's such a cool group of people to be able to be a part of.
Yes, it certainly is. And if you can give one piece of advice to someone who is either sober curious or newly sober, what would it be?
Oh boy, I love giving advice. And I also think advice never works. But I would say maybe a good way to think about it rather than advice, like, because I'm trying to think of myself right before I came in. And I feel like I spent a lot of time trying to decide if I like deserved to be an alcoholic, to call myself an alcoholic, if like people were going to laugh me out of the rooms if I came in. And I think if I could clear up one misconception about what it's like to try out a meeting, to try out sobriety, is that there's no gatekeeping. There's none. You can just show up and listen. You don't have to. I, for some reason, believed that they would not let you stay in the meeting unless you would say the words, "I am an alcoholic." Like, I thought you had to be able to announce yourself, and it had to be able to do that. And I was like, I can't go because I don't know if I am. So no, you don't have to do that. You can just go. You can just listen.
It's so funny that you said that, because I actually had a listener email today that reached out for me the other day for help or advice. And I was like, the biggest game changer for me was meetings. And their reply back today was like, but I don't want to say that I'm an alcoholic. I'm like, you don't have to. Just, there are people that pop in.
PR out. Yeah, it's totally fine. And it's totally fine to come in and just be like listening and hear people talk about what it's like. And it feels good. Yeah. And it also feels good not to drink. I feel like if I look back to all the times I was trying to decide whether I should quit drinking because I had to decide if I was an alcoholic, it's from the other side, even if I wasn't, drinking wasn't adding anything to my life. The fact that I believed it was such a huge sacrifice was in some ways the surest sign that I wasn't alcoholic, that I was using it for things it wasn't meant to do. And so I wish I could go back and just been like, try it. And if you don't find yourself capable of trying it, then maybe you need help doing it. But either way, it shouldn't be a big deal to go a month without alcohol or 2 weeks. And if it feels like it is, or if it feels like, yeah, you can do it, but you have to up your marijuana smoking, which is how I got through the one dry January. There's help. You can get it. You can get there. It doesn't have to be you don't have to solve the problem in your brain before you're allowed to go out and get the help. It's just right there for the taking. So I think everyone should be sober in the whole world. I think everyone should just quit drinking and life would be better. And if, I don't know, I'm on the pink cloud, no, just do it, man. Even if you're not an alcoholic, your life's not going to be worse if you don't drink anymore.
Wow, it was so much fun getting to look back on these handful of interviews. And I, at the time, wasn't sure how long these clips would last or take. So I pulled a whole bunch more. So I have enough content prepared to continue on with this next week for another episode from the vault. But I would love to know what you think of this 2-part episode. Is this something you'd like to see every 6 months or so, of diving back into something from years and years ago and making it fresh and mixing it up with some other content? I would love to hear your thoughts on this format and formula as a way to mix things up here and there. You can do that by reaching out to me at steve@sobersteve.com or engage with me on social media. My favorite place to play is Instagram at GayAPodcast. And you can always, if you're listening right now in your podcasting apps, whatever that is, scroll up to the top of your show notes and click text the show, and you could send a fan mail note for me. Make sure you follow us wherever you're listening so you can get these new episodes every Thursday automatically as soon as they come out. And until then, stay sober, friends.